It's a volcanic eruption like no other in the history of mankind.
We're talking complete devastation. We're talking erasing things.
An explosion so huge that it's unimaginable.
The entire planet is suddenly a killing field.
You would have to wonder, is this the end? Is this the apocalypse?
It's a dangerous universe. There's a lot of ways the human race can go extinct.
Will you be ready? When Doomsday strikes, can any of us survive? $640,000 years ago, a supervolcano erupted in what is now Yellowstone National Park. If it happened again today, millions would die. But the Earth can produce volcanic blasts even more deadly. Could you survive a hyper-eruption?
It's pretty much the worst day the Earth has had for 60 million years.
There's very little that we could do to sustain ourselves.
Imagine people dying all around the world.
There aren't enough people left alive to bury all of the dead bodies.
It's possible that no one survives.
It's a beautiful day in America's oldest national park, Yellowstone, where its famous hot springs bubble and steam. It's been a tourist attraction for nearly 150 years. Old Faithful is the biggest draw. It has erupted more than 1 million times in the park's history.
Faut que tu te mets au centre, viens moi. Et Michel?
Michel, tu nous vois?
Ouais, bah on est arrivé hier. Là on attend Old Faithful. On va vous montrer dans une seconde.
C'est incroyable, hein?
C'est magnifique ça.
200-degree water shoots 185 feet into the air. It's heated by magma, the molten rock from the Earth's interior, which is unusually close to the surface here. It's a volcanic hotspot, and it's the force driving all the geysers and hot springs at Yellowstone.
The way it works is you have water slowly heating up underground in sort of a cavity underground, and eventually that water starts to boil, and the boiling process causes a kind of a water and steam explosion to go shooting up a crevice and blowing out into the air in a big fountain that goes about 100 feet up.
But on this day, the geyser is erratic.
So something strange is happening with Old Faithful, which is it's becoming less faithful. It's becoming less regular. Well, the reason it got its name is because over a certain period of time, you set your watch by it. A certain number of minutes, and it would go off. But now it's becoming less regular, harder to predict. And that means something's going on, something's changing.
The visitors have no idea that Old Faithful's unusual behavior is the first sign that the molten rock below the surface is building to something catastrophic.
There are certain places on the planet called hotspots where hot magma forms underneath the surface of the Earth and, in some cases, slowly comes out, occasionally explosively.
When magma rises through the crust and ends up meeting a large volume of subterranean water, well, what could happen is you flash that water to steam. And if that water's sitting inside rock, the steam has nowhere to go except to explode the rock. And that happens over an enormous area. You have an incredibly devastating explosion.
The most explosive of these events are known as super eruptions. Apart from Yellowstone, there are other hot spots around the world. Under Hawaii, off the coast of South America near Easter Island, in eastern Australia, and beneath Iceland. The underground processes that power Old Faithful can grow to massive scales. Super eruptions, like the one 640 million years ago, can eject 10,000 times the amount of ash and rock than more common volcanic eruptions like Mount St. Helens.
When people think about the scale of volcanic eruptions, there are small volcanoes like cinder cones, larger ones, which we may find in Hawaii, Mount St. Helens, the really big ones in history that we haven't witnessed yet, but we've seen cause extinctions of cultures. And the largest of these we call super eruptions. And that's normally where people think the scale stops. But as it turns out, the Earth's got more devastating possibilities in its box of tricks than just a super eruption. There's something even more powerful on deck.
Past super eruptions in Yellowstone have broken through the surface in places where the Earth's crust is relatively thin. But in this region, there are also parts of the crust that are 100 miles thick. And this allows for an even more dangerous situation to take shape deep underground.
Directly over the hotspot at the thickest part of the crust, gases will start to migrate up into the crust until they get trapped at around 50 miles deep. And they'll build up there and build up there based on the physics, until eventually the force of all that dissolved gas overwhelms the strength of the rock over top, and then it'll fail. And what does that mean when an enormous section of the Earth's crust fails? Think like a cork coming out of a champagne bottle, but this one has a slug that's 50 miles tall.
It could be the most devastating volcanic event of all. Not a super eruption, but a hyper eruption.
A hyper eruption is at a whole other order of magnitude. Hyper eruption, in comparison to a super eruption, is a bit like comparing a stick of dynamite to a firecracker.
A tourist from Mexico City live streams his friends back home as he hikes around Yellowstone Lake. Little does he know, he's 75 miles from the epicenter of what will be a cataclysmic blast.
Pressure is building up for centuries, up until a point in time where all the gas comes out of the molten rock. Creating a hyper eruption, an explosion so huge that it's unimaginable. It projects tons of rock up into the sky.
It would look like a laser beam of rock being fired from the Earth towards space.
So imagine this huge column of molten rock. It's 1,500 feet across and 50-mile high. That amount of molten rock is shot into the sky, into suborbital height. It's almost like a missile.
In one brief moment, the hyper-eruption sets in motion a series of devastating events, threatening all of life as we know it. Will anyone survive? What would happen if a volcanic hypereruption, 100 billion times more powerful than the 1980 Mount St. Helens blast, exploded in Wyoming's Yellowstone National Park, triggering a worldwide disaster? Would you survive? A Boeing 737 cruises past Yellowstone National Park on a routine flight to Atlanta. In an instant, a giant pillar of red-hot rock reaches the plane's altitude of 35,000 feet.
It would be hit by a fist of material.
As it shoots molten rock skyward, the hypereruption produces an explosive release of energy that generates a seismic shockwave unlike anything in human history.
It's likely to be equivalent to a magnitude 11 earthquake.
Survival depends on your location. 10,000 people live in nearby Cody, Wyoming. Most of them are killed in 2 seconds, victims of the powerful shockwave. Inside the park itself, the shockwave reaches Yellowstone's Old Faithful and its historic inn, built in 1903. Hundreds of people inside are crushed or trapped.
Il y a un problème.
Qu'est-ce qui se passe là?
Imagine blowing up all the nuclear arsenal of the Earth, all together. Now imagine that 500 times stronger. That's the kind of explosion that we're imagining here.
The first sensors register the magnitude 11 shock. And an alert goes out through the global seismographic network to scientists all over the world.
Our planet really has an EKG attached to it. And so if a magnitude 11 earthquake goes off, then worldwide, as those seismic waves hit the seismographs, scientists all over the world, and indeed citizens all over the world who are tuned into the internet, see that something very, very dramatic is happening.
A team of geologists in Japan waste no time in booking flights to the US. Their colleagues all over the world are doing the same. From above the shores of Yellowstone Lake, 75 miles away, it's easy to see the eruption's bizarre pillar of light.
The rod of light would be going essentially as high as you could see. It would be 100 miles above you, as high as you could see, to the top of the sky.
The Mexican hiker above the lake streams video to the web.
No one has seen anything like this before. For all intents and purposes, this looks exactly like an asteroid impact happening in reverse. It's as though the Earth has projected an enormous amount of itself out into space at blinding speeds.
Another 5 seconds later, the shockwave hits. "12 miles away, Old Faithful is suddenly quiet. The famous geyser may never be seen again.
As the shockwave travels across Yellowstone, it's going to encounter the cavity where the reservoir of water is for Old Faithful, which is very vulnerable to something like a shockwave, and it would get crushed.
All that's left of the geyser is a wisp of steam. Traveling at 18,000 miles per hour, the blast wave reaches Salt Lake City, 260 miles away in less than 1 minute.
The Great Mormon Temple in Salt Lake City was reinforced against earthquake at roughly Richter 8. The building would collapse, the spires would crumble, as if there were no reinforcement whatsoever. The difference between the magnitude of this shaking and the magnitude of the shaking from a Richter 8 earthquake is roughly 1,000-fold.
And this is just the beginning of the disaster. In less than a minute, 25,000 people are dead. The survivors are the lucky ones who avoid debris from collapsing buildings. The shockwave's killer strength will extend 500 miles in all directions, but that's just the beginning. What follows could be the greatest catastrophe in the history of mankind. 640,000 years ago, a supervolcano erupted, killing millions of prehistoric creatures roaming the ancient landscape. What if an even bigger explosion, a volcanic hyper-eruption, happened today? Could you survive? Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. The most powerful volcanic event ever witnessed by mankind has just rocked the Earth. A massive shockwave, equivalent to a magnitude 11 earthquake, now radiates out in all directions. 25,000 people are already dead. Most of them in the falling buildings of Salt Lake City, 260 miles away.
Imagine dropping a concrete brick into a pond. There's the initial splash, but then there's also a whole series of ripples that come out. So after this hyper-eruption has exploded, the entire ground is just sending ripples out for hundreds of miles.
"400 miles to the northeast, in Trenton, North Dakota, oil tanker trains 118 cars long come and go at a shipping terminal. When the shockwave hits, the terminal's storage tanks rupture, and with the first random spark, 550,000 gallons of oil explode.
These are no ordinary fires. These are fires of black crude oil, which is spewing carbon smoke into the atmosphere. Completely black, completely opaque, completely toxic.
Dozens of terminal workers are burned to death in the explosions, and the thick smoke cloud reaches a mile in height. The deadly seismic wave races across the terrain, spreading destruction everywhere it touches. It advances toward Vancouver, Canada, 750 miles away from the eruption. At this distance, structures do not collapse, but the gondola on an aerial tram begins to swing on its cables as it travels between two mountains north of the city.
The shock wave and resonances set up by the shock wave will start to make this gondola swing harder and harder until eventually the cabling can come out of its seat. And if the towers are too far apart, then the gondola and the cable can plummet to the ground.
400 miles south of Yellowstone, campers at Utah's Arches National Park suspect nothing as they gaze at the spectacular sandstone landmarks.
Arches National Park is a majestic collection of somewhere around 2,000 sandstone arches that have been eroded by wind to leave a gap underneath.
Created after the sandstone was exposed to the elements, the arches have taken 15 million years to form. Delicate Arch, 65 feet tall, is the most popular and famous the world over. Landscape Arch is the longest, stretching 290 feet end to end. And Balanced Rock, weighing 3,500 tons, is an improbable oddity few photographers can resist.
Sandstone is not the best building material, and so when you experience a strong seismic shock like this, these arches, which have lasted for millennia, which were patiently carved by rain and floodwater, will come tumbling down.
journalists around the world pick up on the story.
I'm sure there would be people that think that one or both of these videos being so spectacular were hoaxes. But it doesn't take people long to realize that these two events are real and related.
Video and pictures from both Arches and Yellowstone race around the internet. And as the world gets wind of what's happening in America, the devastation near the eruption site only gets worse. Around Yellowstone's glowing pillar of molten rock, a mushroom cloud forms.
This mushroom cloud is being propelled by so much heat that's been generated. It can move higher through the atmosphere than anything we've ever seen like it before. We're talking 40, 50, 60, higher miles into the sky to the edge of space.
"75 miles away, a blast of air traveling at the speed of sound reaches the waters of Lake Yellowstone, creating a deadly tsunami. 150 people drown in the onrushing wave. The only survivors are those who make it to high ground. The air blast also generates a deafening sound. It's a phenomenon seen on a much smaller scale in 2014, when the Mount Tavorvor volcano became active in Papua New Guinea.
Watch out for the shock, it's coming.
The sound of the eruption took about 13 seconds to reach the boat, just under 3 miles away.
Holy smoking Toledos.
The Yellowstone hypereruption is thousands of times more powerful. The explosive sound doesn't reach Salt Lake City until long after the initial jolt. That's because the seismic waves travel much faster than sound waves.
The Earth is much stiffer than the air, and so disturbances travel much faster through the stiff material. So the seismic waves reach Salt Lake City well before the sound waves do. It takes about 22 minutes before the sound of the explosion is heard in Salt Lake City.
The sound of the blast is so loud that even as far as 2,000 miles away, it measures more than 150 decibels. It's like standing next to a jet at takeoff. It is easily enough to rupture people's eardrums. Then, the eruption ends, almost as suddenly as it began.
A hypereruption takes place much faster than an ordinary volcanic eruption. It's over within 10 minutes or so. After the eruption, after the smoke and dust is cleared, there's a crater that's several miles wide.
The western United States has been hit hard. From Yellowstone to Salt Lake City and beyond, 35,000 are dead. Survivors are left to sort through the wreckage in the 500-mile circle of destruction. But this catastrophic event is about to go global. $37 billion tons of volcanic debris, heated up to more than 3,000 degrees, is flying through space more than 200 miles up. When it comes crashing down, it will be more powerful than a nuclear bomb. The most powerful volcanic eruption in human history has just rocked Yellowstone National Park. Could you survive? 50,000 people are dead, and cities are in ruin across the American and Canadian West from the powerful seismic shock of the hyper-eruption. In the wreckage, a traumatized population struggles as water, power, and other essentials are cut off. Those who have stockpiles of supplies will survive. Those without are in peril. Emergency relief is rushed to Salt Lake City and other devastated communities within hundreds of miles of the eruption. But they are unable to cope with the magnitude of the destruction.
Some people would think the end of the world had come. No one is prepared for a disaster of this magnitude.
Meanwhile, the force of the hyper-eruption is about to wreak more havoc. The volcano's 50-mile-high column of molten rock is flying through the atmosphere.
It's a little bit like a shotgun blast that peppers an area that spreads out a little bit, but it doesn't spread out to cover the entire Earth.
The salvo of debris spans the border of the United States and Canada. Millions of red-hot projectiles slam down on Seattle and Vancouver.
It's like if you've ever been in a hailstorm with thick balls of hail, except these are even heavier, coming down with a lot of momentum. Smashing into cars, breaking windows, going through the roofs of houses.
Calculations show that a hyper-eruption would push out about 3 cubic miles of material. 3 cubic miles of material is like about 12,000 Empire State Buildings, all landing in one region.
The only way to survive the onslaught is to be lucky enough for the projectiles to miss you. Deep underground shelter may help, but not if it's hit by something really big.
Of the stuff that's raining down on the area, you'd expect a range of sizes. Everything from gravel or pebbles all the way up to large buildings or even stadium sizes.
Vancouver's Art Deco City Hall, with its distinctive 12-story tower, was built in 1936 and is only 250 feet wide.
Vancouver City Hall would simply disappear. It's important to keep in mind that the ejecta coming back down is very similar to an asteroid striking from space. So where Vancouver City Hall used to be, you'd now have a crater that's more than a mile wide.
Around the world, cities and countries more distant from the eruption are largely untouched by the destruction. People in places like Iceland, where volcanic eruptions happen regularly, pay special attention to the disaster. But otherwise, life there goes on as normal. For now. Two hours after the eruption, people around the world start literally hearing the massive volcanic explosion as its sound waves circle the globe at 767 miles per hour. In Mexico City, 1,800 miles from the site of the blast, it sounds like thunder.
It would be the shot heard around the world, several times around.
And within 6 hours, the eerie noise hits Europe, Africa, and Asia.
The sound that it makes, like a ripple, will travel all the way around the world once every 32 hours or so and keep going, maybe 3 times, before eventually the intensity of that sound dropped below the limit of human hearing.
Across the world, the sound of the blast is merely a sign of things to come. The far-reaching effects of the eruption will be more disastrous than anyone realizes.
But there's actually another killing mechanism lurking behind all of this, and it's one that could actually threaten entire human civilization across the globe.
"640,000 years ago, a supervolcano erupted in what is now Yellowstone National Park. What if an even more powerful and deadly blast happened today?" The Yellowstone hypereruption is the first of its kind in human history. The sheer explosive force of the hypereruption, its mighty shockwaves, and the ensuing rain of volcanic debris that followed has toppled buildings, destroyed cities, and ignited fires up to 500 miles away. Hundreds of thousands are dead or injured. But a month after the blast, the worst is yet to come.
Frightening conclusions tonight from scientists following last month's so-called hypereruption in the United States. The sulfuric gas it released threatens to plunge the entire planet into a prolonged winter.
Sulfur dioxide is not a gas that you want put into the atmosphere in large quantities. It does a couple things, none of which are particularly good for the environment. Most importantly, the sulfur gas, sulfur dioxide, when it goes into the atmosphere, is converted into sulfuric acid. Tiny droplets, or aerosol droplets of sulfuric acid, which form clouds, which cause the sunlight effectively to bounce off and dramatically cool down the ground below.
The upper atmosphere is flooded with sulfur compounds from the eruption, blocking sunlight, chilling the climate, and plunging the world into a sudden ice age. As the deep freeze takes hold, civilization is slowly brought to its knees. The canals of Venice are frozen. The wheat fields of the Midwest are dead. Blizzards whip across landscapes everywhere, making travel nearly impossible and bringing normal life to a grinding halt.
Once the temperature starts plummeting, life as we know it is going to fundamentally change.
Now, survival becomes a question of finding food for those left alive.
So I think people would start hoarding food very quickly. Looting, that's a possibility. If you're thinking about feeding your family, you might think about stealing food from stores.
The severe blocking of sunlight that would follow a hypereruption would lead to something like 99% of the plant life on Earth dying. And that die-off would have severe consequences for the food webs that most life on Earth depends on.
By some accounts, you're reaching 6 billion people dying from lack of food.
There's a better chance for survival close to the equator where the temperatures have dropped the least. In Venezuela, scientists from the nation's agriculture ministry quickly recognized the impact of the Ice Age. Tropical crops like sugar and bananas will no longer grow. The experts rush to obtain seeds of other plants that will thrive and produce food in the new colder conditions.
We will take grains that were specialized for northern climates, and we'll be growing some of that at the equator. So we'll be growing oats and rye down on the equator.
But these new seeds will only do so much.
They say we have about a year's worth of food for everyone on the planet.
That includes everything in grain silos, warehouses, processing plants, remaining livestock. After the first year of the Ice Age, food for humans, for creatures of all kinds, will be gone.
Almost all animals of all species will die because they don't have nutrition. This is what happens in a mass extinction.
What happens to a world brought to its knees by the worst volcanic eruption in history? The Yellowstone hyper-eruption has left cities in ruins. And its volcanic gases have blanketed the atmosphere, blocking the sun, and triggering a global ice age that has brought civilization to the brink. Decimated by starvation, the human population plummets to less than 1 billion people.
You've reached a point now where there aren't enough people left alive to bury all of the dead bodies. You would have entire populations either vacate or die in place.
Some survive by luck. Those who happen to live in narrow equatorial regions do not freeze. Other people find clever strategies to adapt and overcome the extreme cold. Perhaps surprisingly, a chance of life exists in Iceland, where cold was already a way of life before the disaster.
They are already used to an almost barren environment, and they certainly have the knowledge and the technique necessary to, I believe, adapt to such an environment.
Iceland has something that most populated parts of the planet don't: an underground source of heat and energy. The country sits on top of a volcanic hotspot. Survivors here are able to harness that heat to keep greenhouses warm despite freezing temperatures. With the collapse of traditional outdoor farming, these indoor farms will be a key to survival. More than 1,500 miles away in Denmark, another colony of survivors uses technology that has been under development in the country since 2001. They're turning natural gas into food.
Natural gas is mostly composed of methane, And as it turns out, there are some microorganisms that can eat methane for food. And one of the strategies for finding an alternate food supply after a disaster like this is supplying these bacteria with natural gas and then harvesting them as food themselves.
Half of Denmark's natural gas is kept in underground storage near the town of Stenlille. Here, a food factory is built. They feed the gas to the methane-eating bacteria. The microbes are then dried to produce a highly nutritious edible protein. These survivors have weathered the worst of the hypereruption's effects. Now, 10 years after the volcanic disaster began, Earth's climate is about to turn a corner.
After about a decade, the sulfur dioxide has rained out of the atmosphere and its effects on the climate start to wane. But that's when the effects of the other gas produced by the hypereruption start to rear its head, and that's carbon dioxide. And that will actually take the climate in the opposite direction and start to warm everything.
The rapid warming period is slow to die down. It's going to last for thousands of years after the eruption.
The world may have suffered a mass extinction, but human beings are among those who dodged the bullet.
We are talking about 99.99% of all humans dying. But that is not an extinction. That is just a terrible calamity.
We won't be able to survive in the same way that we're doing right now. We won't be able to have big infrastructure projects. We won't have large numbers of people living together, for that matter.
As the Earth begins to warm, how long will it take humanity's few survivors to rebuild civilization?
"200 years after the disaster, plant life has started to repopulate. And this began as ferns and ground plant life across the mainland. And slowly, trees now start to recover forests.
Imagine how many cities will be first frozen, then empty of people, devoid of life, and then probably forgotten. And as the planet warms up again, the green will come back to those long-forgotten cities.
Santiago, Chile is abandoned. While many Chileans survived by fishing productive seas during the cold spell, the high temperatures now kill the ocean life.
During this hot phase, when the top of the ocean becomes warm, it becomes stagnant. And that means that it doesn't circulate, it loses all its nutrients, and basically, during this phase, the ocean becomes a desert.
But the warm climate now makes it possible for surviving humans to grow food again. 2 centuries after the eruption, civilization begins to revive itself. And despite the extent of the global disaster, mankind won't necessarily have to return to a primitive existence.
The Dark Ages in Europe, people forgot about Rome. It took humankind 1,000 years to get back to where the Greeks and the Romans had been. But that's not going to happen this time. We know too much.
The planet and its people now live in a new world, whose history took a sharp turn with the volcanic explosion at Yellowstone. The hypereruption's crater is filled with water from nearby streams and rivers. A striking landmark that will last for thousands of years.
It's a lake surrounded by vegetation, and I think, ironically, it actually looks very idyllic. It would be calm. I think for the survivors of the new civilization that comes thereafter, this would be a symbol. And it actually represents the beginning of the new world as opposed to the end.
The clock of destruction is ticking. A deadly heat wave is sweeping over the entire Earth, with no end in sight. Except total annihilation. Because every day, the Earth is falling closer and closer toward the sun.
There's no doubt that as Earth goes toward the sun and temperatures rise, ice in Antarctica will melt, and that will make the ocean levels rise.
You have extreme temperatures. You can't go outside. You try to turn on the air conditioning, but the power is out.
All the water in our blood would be boiling into vapor. We would boil. This is the beginning of hell.
Will you be ready? When Doomsday strikes, can any of us survive? Earth travels around the sun at just the right distance for life to exist. But what if our planet were suddenly thrown from its orbit and spiraling into the blazing heat of the sun? How long could we survive?
We haven't evolved to breathe hot air. If you're outside and it's 141 degrees, you'll burn your lungs.
As you get closer to the sun, there's this death wave that moves both directions towards both poles, and people have to keep moving farther and farther north or south to stay alive.
You start reaching temperatures where aluminum melts, and even steel. The whole memory of civilization is completely erased.
Beneath the North Atlantic, something strange is happening to the world's most famous shipwreck.
The Titanic, 3,800 meters down, is in the inky blackness of the deep ocean.
The Titanic has been trapped in the dark since it sank in 1912. But today, the wreck is suddenly bathed in sunlight, and it starts to rise from the ocean floor. In a field outside Houston, Texas, two amateur astronomers find that their stargazing app, which has always been accurate before, isn't lining up with the night sky. The stars are in the wrong place. Normally, every night the stars and planets look like they're in slightly different parts of the sky, because the Earth is in a slightly different place in its yearly orbit around the sun. But on this night, the stars and planets rise exactly where they did the night before.
So astronomers would think, oh, I just screwed up something. But then they would talk to the other astronomers, and every telescope in the world would be wrong.
The reason the stars are no longer changing their positions is that after 4.5 billion years, the Earth is no longer orbiting around the sun.
This is a terrifying thought.
The cause is 30 billion miles away. A rogue star with the mass of the sun is moving through space.
We think of stars as being stationary. But in fact, sometimes a star will come a little too close and disrupt things. If the star got really close, it could screw up the orbits of planets.
The rogue star's gravity is so powerful that as it passes, it affects the Earth, even across billions of miles.
If a rogue star were to pass behind Earth, it's in the direction opposite to Earth's motion, in which case the gravitational pull retards the Earth and takes away some orbital energy.
The star's gravitational pull on Earth exactly matches the energy of our orbit around the sun, but it pulls in the opposite direction.
That would stop Earth in its orbit, and Earth then would start falling almost directly toward the sun.
Earth has orbited the sun at an average distance of 93 million miles. Now, with that orbit interrupted, the gravity of the sun is pulling us closer at the rate of 500,000 miles a day. And the closer we get, the hotter it gets. Back in Houston, in a normal year, the city has almost 3 months where the average temperature is above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, daily temperatures are reaching 100. Texans deal with the heat wave the way they always do, with air conditioning. (3,652 miles away), Barrow, Alaska, is also dealing with a heat wave. And since America's northernmost city has an average temperature that's below freezing, most people don't have air conditioning. Instead, they are sweating through Houston-like temperatures in the upper 90s. It's even worse in places like Lagos, Nigeria. Africa's largest metropolis has a weak and poorly maintained electrical grid. Even with diesel-powered backup generators, the citizens of Lagos have a hard time fighting the heat. At first, people think this is just another heat wave. But this rise in temperature is the beginning of the end of the world. Out-of-season hurricane cells form in the Caribbean. Thousands flee inland as 100-mile-an-hour winds slam into Cuba's northern coast, tearing apart homes and flooding the streets of Havana.
Global warming increases the power of storms. We now have more powerful hurricanes than we had in the past just because we've heated up the planet. So when we're doing the same thing as global warming, we're going to be increasing the power of storms. After the first week or so, storms would pretty much instantaneously react to higher temperatures. When a hurricane goes over warm water, it increases in speed and ferocity.
All along the Atlantic seaboard, hundreds of thousands of people board up windows, pile up sandbags in front of their homes, and stockpile food and water. As the storm picks up strength, it moves toward the United States and makes a deadly landfall on Cape Fear, North Carolina.
As heat rises, it causes more wind storms.
Thousands of people are suddenly homeless and struggle to survive against the raging storm. Some make it to safety. Others aren't so lucky. At the same time, almost 500 miles to the north, another superstorm strikes the Atlantic City boardwalk. and floods the New Jersey shore. Tourists and residents are forced into a desperate scramble for higher ground.
So very quickly, pretty much the beach is all over the place. After even 6 days, you're going to have such unstable weather patterns that they're going to be flooded completely.
While hurricanes lash the East Coast, tornadoes spring up in the flatlands of Texas. And 200-mile-an-hour winds rip right through the middle of Dallas.
We'll get more tornadoes, more crazy weather, more fronts. Things will just get more extreme all over.
You've got more and more severe thunderstorms, which would generate more lightning, which would then have the capacity to ignite some of this drier tinder and set more forest fires.
But the real danger is the heat that's causing the storms. The temperatures that increase every day, threatening the lives of everyone on Earth.
Since the dawn of humanity, seeing the sunrise is the beginning of a new day. But it will get to a point where this life-giving ball of energy will very quickly become this nuclear furnace of death, that the last thing you want to see every morning is that globe very, very slowly coming at you. Every day we fall closer to the sun. Every day we're just that much closer to hell.
If the Earth suddenly started moving closer to the sun, triggering an unprecedented heat wave, how could you survive? Two weeks after being knocked out of orbit by a rogue star, Earth is almost 7.5 million miles closer to the sun. Temperatures in Houston and other American cities keep soaring. More people are staying indoors and drinking more water. Meanwhile, in much of Europe, temperatures reach 38 degrees Celsius or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. More than 30% higher than normal. Across the continent, a heat wave strikes down the weak and the elderly, from Scotland to Russia.
Biological systems have a thermostat, a set temperature range, where the chemical reactions that take place in our body are at their comfortable, optimal point. And only a few degrees up or down can have severe and drastic effects on the human body, on other biological systems.
The most common cause of death is heat stroke. When the core body temperature exceeds 105 degrees, it affects the central nervous system. The heat can shut down your body and kill you. For hundreds of millions, air conditioning is no longer about comfort. It's about survival. Those who have air conditioning stay inside and live, while those without air conditioning die as their rooms become coffins.
Air conditioning is not very common in Europe. Most people are not used to deal with such a fast or quick change in temperature.
Part of that's because they have a more temperate climate, and part of it is because they have these really old buildings that just weren't built for it. So when the heat goes up, those people without air conditioning have nowhere to go.
In the early 21st century, heat waves killed tens of thousands of Europeans after temperatures rose between 95 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
And that was just a little bit higher than average temperatures. That wasn't like the extremes we would see if the Earth is heading towards the sun.
In Dubai, despite the desert heat outside, the grand hotels and shopping malls maintain an average indoor temperature of 78 degrees. And it's always below freezing in the indoor ski resort. Without air conditioning, supported by a massive electrical infrastructure, cities like Dubai or Las Vegas, Phoenix or Houston can't function. In these cities, the cool air is still blowing. For now.
As people are beginning to need that 24 hours a day cooling to try to stay alive, it's going to put severe stresses on the power grid.
"21 days since the Earth was forced out of orbit. We are now almost 13 million miles closer to the sun. Water is evaporating quickly from rivers and reservoirs in cities across the world.
Rivers would be dropping because, other than just evaporating, they're also fed by melt from mountains. All of that would start to go first.
Most of the shallow rivers, canals or so will fall dry.
Once you get close enough to the sun, the canals of Venice would start to evaporate. With no water left behind,
Pigeons still flock in the Piazza San Marco. These birds have evolved to endure temperatures of 120 degrees Fahrenheit and above. But there are no people in the square.
so it'd be this ghost town with dry canals everywhere.
As temperatures continue to rise, throughout North America and Northern Europe and Asia, all the snow has melted from the upper latitudes. People are suffering and dying. Around the equator, the heat is even more intense. 130 degrees or higher. In countries like Colombia and Brazil, Uganda, Kenya and Indonesia, there are more corpses than the survivors can bury.
The people around the middle of the earth would be dead.
And the horror is only beginning. As we fall closer and closer towards the sun, people seek shelter inside mountains, while cities are attacked by armies of sand. If Earth were thrown out of orbit and kept falling closer to the heat of the sun, what would happen to humanity? Across the world, the extreme heat turns fertile land into desert. Egypt is no longer nourished by the waters of the Nile.
When the Nile begins to drop in water level, all of the surrounding area that it used to flood will start to dry out.
What follows is a catastrophe that dwarfs the 10 plagues of the Bible.
You start to get sandstorms, to the point where you have sand blowing all the way from Western Africa into Israel and beyond. You would actually have the same thing at the same time in the American Southwest, because they're at the same latitude. You would have Phoenix and Tucson dumping all of their sand toward New Mexico dumping it into Houston. There would be massive sandstorms from eastern California that would stretch 3 states over.
The blowing sand blocks streets and roadways and attacks people with a vengeance. Across the American West and Southwest, thousands die of suffocation, and many more flood hospitals with lung infections. Across the world, the death toll is rising. Over 1 million people have died from hurricanes, sandstorms, and heat stroke. But ironically, much of the world is still unaffected. 70% of the planet is water. And just a short way below the ocean's surface, marine life goes on as before.
Ocean water doesn't transmit sunlight very well. So every 45 meters deeper, you lose another 36% of whatever light was left. And it takes time for the heat changes, for the temperature changes to build up.
So, on the muddy floor of the North Atlantic, creatures that have made their home in the wreck of the Titanic are unaffected. Since it went down in 1912, the Titanic has become home to deep-sea animals like the rat-tailed fish and the spider crab. They feed and breed in the decaying hulk. 2.5 miles of near-freezing water insulates them from the heat wave above.
As far as they're concerned, nothing has changed.
But back on the surface, life hangs in the balance.
Humans, because we have an audacity to us, will try and hold on as long as possible.
Some hope to find shelter in the side of a mountain in China's Shanxi province. More than 3,000 feet above sea level lies the Ningwu Ice Cave. 300 feet deep, this cave traps frigid winter air and remains frozen all year round, lined with thick ice, even on the hottest days.
There are ice caves, and I've been in a number of them. It is very, very, very cold on the interior.
Of course, they would need supplies of food and water and power, and they would need to somehow deal with sewage, and they'd have lots and lots of problems, but they could try to live in these caves.
There are also other frozen places in the world where desperate people seek shelter. The North and South Poles.
As you get closer to the sun, there's this death wave that moves both directions towards both poles, and people have to keep moving farther and farther north or south to stay alive.
People will try to head toward the Arctic Circle or Antarctica or book passage on ice clippers.
Because Antarctica is one of the most protected places. You get the sun's rays at an oblique angle, and so the temperatures don't rise as fast.
It takes time for the heat changes, for the temperature changes to build up.
Down there, it's going to be about 70 degrees cooler.
But survival at the poles is anything but easy.
You're going to inhospitable places to begin with. You're trading one inhospitable spot for another. You're going to a place with no infrastructure, with no farming, with no food.
An American icebreaker research vessel is off the coast of Ross Island in Antarctica. Its mission is not to escape the rapidly warming climate, but to study it. The scientists still pass glaciers and ice sheets, but that ice is melting faster than ever. On board the icebreaker, computer models reveal that if we continue towards the sun at this rate, almost all of Antarctica's ice will disappear in less than a month.
There's no doubt that as Earth goes toward the sun and temperatures rise, ice in Antarctica will melt, and that will make the ocean levels rise.
The coasts of the world begin to flood.
Parts of coastal Hawaii would undoubtedly be affected by the rising sea levels. Bangladesh has a very low average height above sea level. The Netherlands has a low height. They're toast. Louisiana, New Orleans, places like that will get flooded.
This is a constant level of water that is rising from Maine to Key West, from Alaska all the way down to San Diego. The Mississippi Delta is reaching into Oklahoma. It's absolute chaos.
The Atlantic City Boardwalk is underwater. The deluxe casinos give way to the ocean. Even many miles inland, away from coastal flooding, melting ice reshapes landscapes across the world. In Zermatt, Switzerland, with the temperature hitting 110 degrees Fahrenheit, people hear an echoing boom, and a strange gray and white cloud of dust fills the streets. It comes from the nearby Matterhorn.
The Matterhorn has glaciers right at the base of it, and they're sort of helping keep the thing together. When you start melting the glaciers, parts of it would start to crumble.
From the Matterhorn to the Himalayas to the Andes, you would have massive avalanches, hundreds of thousands of cubic feet densely packed ice and snow heat up and crack.
As temperatures continue to soar, the skies will be streaked with fire. And even the coldest shelters may fall to the rising heat. If planet Earth were thrown out of orbit and started hurtling towards the sun, how long could we survive? After 5 weeks, the Earth, traveling at 22,000 miles an hour, is now only 74 million miles away from the sun. The skies are streaked with blazing light, as hundreds of satellites cascade through the air as fireballs.
The atmosphere around the Earth is made of gases, and when they get hot, they expand. And that means that the low-lying satellites are going to start feeling a drag that they didn't feel before. That drag is going to destabilize their orbits, and because of that, those may fall, just like a meteor shower.
The destruction of satellites means the loss of television and radio services in towns and cities across the world. Cell phones and the internet also start to fail because the electrical power grid is being pushed to its limit by people desperate for air conditioning.
By the time you reach day 35, the average temperatures have gotten up to the range that are exceeding the very highest temperatures ever recorded on the Earth, things like 135, 137 degrees or so. That's getting near death zone sort of temperatures for the human body.
we haven't evolved to breathe hot air. If you're outside and it's 141 degrees and the average humidity is, say, 10%, you'll burn your lungs.
Can't breathe.
In Lagos and across the world, electricity is just a flicker. Throughout Africa and much of Asia, cities are cemeteries. In Barrow, Alaska, people fight to stay alive with new air conditioning systems, powered by emergency generators. But that can't last forever.
The power grids are so taxed from days and weeks of trying to combat this heat that they're failing. Also, the problem is humidity. If you're in a very humid environment, you can have a wet mat and a fan, and the evaporation of the water will cool the air. But when you're in a dry heat, you need a radiator type air conditioner. You need one with an antifreeze, with coolant, like a radiator in a car. So if you're running it for the past 3 weeks, as the temperature has slowly jumped from 70 to 80 to 100 to 120, now 141, the coatings on wires are getting superheated. If that air conditioner is running too much, it will begin to overheat. It will begin to lose that coolant. It will begin to fail. And you're sitting in your room, slowly dying of heat exposure.
The strain on the grid also threatens those who hoped to escape death through cryogenics. Several hundred people have had themselves frozen at the point of death in the hope of eventual revival. Their bodies have survived the global heat wave until the power grid, overwhelmed by the need for air conditioning, finally shuts down. Across the entire American Southwest, even the enormous cooling systems in large hotels have reached their limits.
Large industrial air conditioners can reduce a 120-degree day down to the mid-70s in your room. But if it's 160 outside, sure, you're gonna be hanging out at 105, maybe 106 degrees. You're drinking water every half hour in order for your biological functions to continue functioning. 105 inside a building with no airflow? That's horrifying.
One by one, in city after city, the power goes out. And time runs out for millions of people, the victims of heat stroke.
And you have extreme temperatures. You can't go outside. You try to turn on the air conditioning, but the power is out, and so you just die. In addition to humans, of course, animals will start to go extinct. It will start with animals who can only tolerate a small range in temperature, animals that are used to a very particular environment. But then it will start expanding to more and more animals. There are animals that are adapted to the desert already, but they may actually not survive as long as you think, because the deserts are some of the places that are gonna get the hottest first.
Traveling at almost 42,000 miles an hour, the Earth is now just 68 million miles from the Sun. And the average temperature is an unbearable 169 degrees.
The term nightmare doesn't really even apply anymore. This is the beginning of hell.
In Ningwu, China, the ice cave, once a sanctuary for desperate survivors, becomes a prison. The heat of the outside air has seeped inside.
At some point, even those caves themselves are going to begin to melt.
You will not escape this.
Even in the Antarctic, the temperature is now 130 degrees, at the upper limit of what human beings can endure. The American research team living on an icebreaker is struggling to hang on.
Antarctica may be one of the last habitable places on Earth. But if there's any ice left on the planet at all, it's rapidly melting. It's not really an ice cap anymore. It's more of a weird slushy. Boats would be under constant flux of glaciers falling over and pushing tides.
In the rest of the world, survival is no longer possible.
So on day 47, with a global temperature average of 217 degrees, that's 5 degrees over the boiling point of water.
This is beyond human habitability.
Not only does water boil, but being mostly water, we would boil. All the water in our blood would be boiling into vapor. All of that excess vapor will be then going to your brain and your heart. Strokes, cardiac arrest.
This is the shutdown of biological systems.
You will die.
The oceans are evaporating, and steam begins to spread over the Earth.
So you're going to have essentially an unbearable steam bath at a temperature of boiling water.
It's the worst sauna on Earth.
The hot mist fills the ruins of Havana, the ghostly canals of Venice, and soon, most of the planet. As oceans boil and humanity is left for dead, our proudest achievements burn and melt. What if, after 4.6 billion years, Earth was thrown out of orbit and fell towards the sun? Could our planet survive? With an average air temperature more than 200 degrees, surface life on Earth has ended. And so has any hope of seeking refuge. In space.
You might think that a natural escape route for us, should such a catastrophe like this happen, would be to launch a planetary ark of some sort, and let's go live on Mars.
However, even if there were time to build and launch spaceships, it would be impossible to know where to aim them.
Calculations that we do when we're launching spacecraft rely very heavily upon the precise predictability of where things are in the solar system. The Earth is now falling into the sun. That's going to put everything else in the solar system out of whack.
If you were NASA or some other space agency, Earth is no longer at exactly the same position as you thought it was.
There's no way to escape this. You can't even escape it in space. If we haven't colonized Mars by then, we're never going to.
So we have no out at this point as this disaster unfolds.
After 6.5 weeks of falling toward the sun, our planet is simply too hot to live on. Of the over 7 billion people on Earth, no one is left alive. Even on the icebreaker in Antarctica, the last humans are dead, the blood inside them boiling, like the seas around them.
Because the surface of the water will be above 212 degrees. If an iceberg were to slough off a glacier, you would have, for a very brief moment, an iceberg sailing past your research vessel as the sea around you is beginning to very gently roil. That would be a very strange sight. Think of it as an ice cube in a bowl of soup. It will exist for a moment, but then just slowly fade and disappear.
Day 53, the oceans are boiling. Almost all life is gone. Only stuff in the deep, deep ocean may survive.
After almost 9 weeks of falling towards the sun, temperatures on Earth exceed 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Across the world, wood spontaneously combusts. Furniture ignites. Billions of books burst into flame.
As the Earth gets hotter and hotter, you get the wood all drying out. Once you pass the combustion point of wood, you get massive forest fires everywhere. You won't have people to put this stuff out. So you're just gonna get these raging forest fires all over Earth. That's gonna increase smoke. It may block out some of the light of the sun, but it doesn't matter. It's still gonna keep getting hot.
Hot enough for gasoline to burst into flames on its own.
Everything that has fuel in it is a bomb at this point.
More than 1 billion cars, buses, and trucks around the world explode.
It's gonna be a real hellscape.
Amidst the devastation, another force, the sun's gravity, begins to tear at the structure of the planet.
The Earth itself, for most of this plunge, until almost near the final couple days, other than the temperature changes, the structure of the Earth itself is relatively unchanged until the final moments, until we're actually practically within the solar photosphere, the outermost atmosphere of the sun.
Earth has not yet had its worst day. That is about to come. If the Earth were thrown out of orbit and falling towards the sun, could our planet survive? Every human on Earth has perished in burning heat.
Probably won't even see the skeletons at that point, because at those temperatures, that organic matter is going to break down and effectively burn to ash. So it's going to be a world that is fundamentally different than anything that we know.
The planet we once lived on is only 6.5 million miles from the sun and closing in at 500,000 miles an hour.
At this stage of the game, the Earth itself would actually look probably very much like a very large comet. You're evaporating so much water from the surface of the oceans. Upper parts of the atmosphere are being evaporated off by the extreme heat of the sun. The atmosphere itself is being lost at this point.
Today is Earth's last day. At dawn, the temperature is 800 degrees Celsius, 1,472 degrees Fahrenheit. At the beginning of our fateful fall into the sun, Earth's average temperature rose by 2 degrees Fahrenheit in a week. Now, it rises 3 degrees every minute. The Statue of Liberty stands in what was once New York Harbor, but is now a vast canyon.
The harbor has been evaporated and dry, desiccated.
As for Lady Liberty, her skin is copper. Her copper torch is coated in 24-karat gold. The gold melts away, and the copper flame turns to liquid.
You start reaching temperatures where aluminum melts and even steel melts. You have limestone melting and granite melting. The whole memory of civilization is completely erased. There's nothing left of us.
Ten hours into the 65th day, the temperature exceeds 3,600 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, even mountains in the mantle of the Earth simply melt.
What was once what we call a rocky planet really becomes a boiling soup of all sorts of melting rocks and metals.
Then, 2.5 hours later, 1 million miles from the sun, the sun's gravitational pull on the Earth changes the very shape of our planet.
The final destruction of the Earth is not so much the evaporation of the water and the boiling of the rock. The final doom of the Earth is not the heat effects from the sun, but the sun's gravity.
The gravity triggers every single earthquake fault. Massive temblors shake the planet.
Also, fissures in Earth's crust will open the passage for magma to flow through known openings, new openings, and volcanic vents.
Every volcano on Earth explodes.
The Earth starts to get torn apart.
As the crust breaks, the remaining ocean water rises, pulled by the sun's gravity, and evaporates in the sun's overwhelming heat.
And so the final light that the Titanic sees in the deep ocean, which has been dark all this time, is going to be the water of the Earth itself flows off of the planet and is evaporated as it goes.
There will be a brief moment where all the Earth's water evaporates. There'll be a brief moment where the sun will dawn upon the Titanic once more.
The Titanic sees the brilliant flare of the sun, and in those last few seconds, the Earth itself is pulled apart, and literally every bit of the Earth itself is exposed to the solar atmosphere.
The Earth at its very end looks very much like the Earth at its infancy. A very hot ball of lava deformed by the forces of the sun. So what you're seeing is our history in reverse.
The gravity becomes so strong that Earth will deform and the Earth will simply fall into pieces.
And then that's it.
In the end, everything gets destroyed.
The ultimate fate of the Earth is that it will be ripped apart into these chunks that will then fly into the sun. When we pollute the pristine hydrogen atmosphere of the sun with everything that has ever lived on Earth, it may produce some kind of signature that distant astronomers other places could see on our star and say, something really crazy happened there.
The sun will continue to burn brightly for billions of years. But for the Earth, this has truly been Armageddon. This is truly the end. Across the world, a deadly attack unfolds.
This is it. This is the apocalypse. This is fire and brimstone and cross your fingers.
It's a fight for survival against an alien invasion.
You look up, you see perhaps what look like meteors or fireballs in the night sky.
They strike with more powerful weapons than we've ever seen. From energy beams to biological warfare.
Our entire body would not feel like it was part of us any longer. We would begin attacking anything that got near us.
Panic, complete panic. People are scrambling for their lives.
Billions of human lives have ended.
Will you be ready? When Doomsday strikes, can any of us survive? There are over 100 billion planets in our galaxy. Most scientists believe there must be alien life out there, and some may be more technologically advanced than us. What if these aliens came to Earth, and they didn't come in peace?
All of a sudden, the sky above their heads lights up with meteors. Meteors raining down everywhere.
Society would begin almost immediately to break down.
We will not be just fighting an alien invasion from the skies, but we will be fighting to survive against other humans that are looting, panicking, freaking out.
At Vandenberg Air Force Base in California, officers of the Joint Space Operations Center monitor the skies. Their job is to detect and track all artificial objects in Earth's orbit. Although run by the U.S. military, it's staffed by an international team of Americans, Brits, Canadians, and Australians.
You're monitoring all the satellites above, you're monitoring all the aircraft, you're monitoring the possibility of enemy missiles coming in.
The instruments detect a large object approaching Earth. It's as far away as the moon, and it's moving in an unusual way.
Deep sky observations are done every day in low Earth orbit. We have radar that tracks all of the trash that is surrounding Earth, whether it's satellites, a bolt coming off an Apollo capsule. We know where stuff is. We know where our probes are. Something completely anomalous will immediately raise red flags.
It's not a comet. It's not an asteroid. Officials suspect something far more extraordinary.
There's absolutely a scientific consensus that the universe is so large, statistically there has to be intelligent life out there somewhere. Just because we haven't found it yet doesn't mean it doesn't exist. We know something is out there.
To deny that there would be any other intelligent life out there in the vastness of eternity, I think is a little bit naive. There's got to be somebody out there.
Although it seems like a plot out of a science fiction film, governments worldwide consider the threat of alien invasion a possibility, and some have a plan of action in place.
In a universe nearly 14 billion years old, it's easy to conceive that there could be civilizations out there with a billion-year head start on us. With my 21 years at the Ministry of Defense, I've clearly gained an insight into how we would fight an alien invasion. I know full well that there are, of course, deeply classified projects, black projects, classified weapons programs that are not yet public knowledge.
Members of Congress, I have the
The United States Capitol building, 9 p.m.
The President of the United States.
The President gives the annual State of the Union address. It's the optimal time for an attack on the most powerful nation on Earth.
On the night of the State of the Union address, you would have the U.S. President, U.S. Vice President, all members of the House of Representatives, all senators present under one roof at one time.
So with that, you get a very large portion of the United States' political leadership, which would be, from the extraterrestrial standpoint, a fairly good starting point for taking the United States military offline. It does two things. One, it affects our decision-making, and two, it sends a very powerful statement that whoever, whatever it is that's attacking us, they're not here to play.
In a surprise attack, the space object unleashes dozens of smaller craft into Earth's atmosphere.
An alien attack on the planet could come in the form of this force that can kind of hover above us and strike with pinpoint accuracy against targets that make sense.
They would want to take out our most advanced militaries. And probably the most advanced military around the world is that of the United States. And to take out our military, you have to take out the leadership. Because without the leadership in the White House in Washington, then the military really doesn't have direction.
One alien craft settles over Washington, D.C., while others take position over London, Moscow, and other world capitals. Just as the craft are about to strike, the aliens start knocking out our communication satellites hovering in space. The goal is to cripple the military's ability to respond.
The first thing, they would get rid of our satellites so that we get completely confused.
They could use what we call ASAT, an anti-satellite weapon, which is something as simple as a rock or a bullet that can be very effective in space.
If you disrupt communication, you disrupt the ability to react. And if they can't see where you're coming from, well, then it's easier to go in.
The Space Operations Center at Vandenberg, along with other key U.S. military command centers, are now helpless.
All of a sudden, your screens go dark. All of a sudden, you have no information.
They would blind us by knocking out our satellites, GPS, telecommunications.
Now, the alien air war is unleashed.
This may take the form of laser weapons, directed energy weapons, and others that we can only speculate about. Perhaps some things we can't even guess at.
The capital and most of central Washington are vaporized, replaced by a crater over a half-mile deep. More than 1/3 of the nearly 700,000 residents in Washington, D.C. are killed in the initial onslaught. And the entire upper echelon of the U.S. government is eliminated in a blinding flash.
This would have the effect of decapitating the leadership of the United States. You'd take out the president, the cabinet, the joint chiefs, the Supreme Court, a large part of Congress.
To take out that building, you will be taking away all of the elected officials who can make decisions and lead the country in a time of crisis.
coordinated attacks centered on important world capitals simultaneously strike around the globe.
You take out the Kremlin, and then you take out London, and then you take out Beijing, and you take out all of these cities simultaneously. All of that order that civilization has struggled for thousands of years is wiped away as if it never existed.
Most societies have the same vulnerabilities when it comes to leadership. There's a comparatively small group, and if you take them out, the whole thing comes crashing down.
Moments later, a new wave of the assault begins. Thousands of projectiles enter Earth's atmosphere and race towards the surface. What are they? And can any of us survive this alien attack? If aliens attacked our planet, could we survive? It's been 10 minutes since an unidentified object from space unleashed a devastating assault on humanity. But while government structures from the White House to the Kremlin have been wiped out, it's happened so quickly that in some places, people don't even realize an attack has begun. Outside of Buenos Aires, Argentina, a crowd fills the seats of a local stadium.
So here we are, sitting in the stands. Everybody's focused on the field down below. The lights are brilliant as they're playing football across the field back and forth, and then all of a sudden, the sky above their heads lights up.
You look up, you see something's coming into the atmosphere. Looks as if it's burning up. You just think, oh, a shooting star, and you make a wish.
But these are no meteors. 1,000 feet above the stadium, they stop in midair, burst open, and a black rain erupts down towards the crowd below.
One very efficient way to attack civilization like ours is with a biological weapon, something that could infect a few people around the world and then spread from person to person.
National security experts warn that just one craft spraying 200 pounds of a biological agent over a heavily populated area could kill 3 million people.
It would make the most sense for them to do so against the most heavily populated areas first. You have a concentration of what you're attempting to get rid of, and that is humankind.
People sprayed by the black rain have no idea that it's a biological ticking time bomb, gruesomely engineered to spread death around the planet. Meanwhile, the aliens continue to attack our infrastructure. Having already destroyed our satellites, they set their sights on the most critical form of communication for the masses, the internet. New York City. At 60 Hudson Street sits an unassuming building. But its walls conceal a vast network of servers and cables. More than 100 telecommunication companies run their networks through this major hub. And each one is critical for the operation of the internet and global communications.
Those digital hubs are really the heart of the internet. And the internet is not just something that we use for posting and disseminating funny cat videos. They're actually a critical and essential thing that we use on a daily basis, that not just for passive and silly purposes, but for incredibly important purposes.
If the extraterrestrial attack is able to take out the internet, our economy and our basic infrastructure would fail.
These facilities, like 60 Hudson Street, are very vulnerable. You take them out, and basically the internet goes down. So here we are, so dependent on our computers, our laptops, our cellular telephones, and suddenly none of that works.
So that's another thing that the extraterrestrials could do if they really just wanted to shut our civilization down.
Identical attacks destroyed tech centers at One Wilshire, Los Angeles, California. Telehouse, Paris, France. Global Switch, London, England. And Equinix in Palo Alto, California.
Society is really, I think, held together by a very vulnerable, interwoven web of key points. And, you know, if you take down a few of those critical hubs, the whole thing comes crashing down.
Help me! Please, I'm begging you! Help me!
Just 1 hour after the initial attack, global communications are completely destroyed. In cities everywhere, terrified people, many covered by the mysterious black rain, are cut off from any information about what's happening.
It would be so disorienting for people and so scary for people that it would be complete chaos.
This is the apocalypse. This is fire and brimstone, and cross your fingers that you make it through to the other end of this.
With the world's highest-ranking military leaders wiped out in attacks on centers of government, the aliens now target individual military bases around the world. At Vandenberg Air Force Base, as the Joint Space Operations Center works to establish any communication at all up the chain of command, the base itself becomes a target.
Key targets would be the military. Anything that we could use later on to maybe try to fight back, these facilities would themselves be prime targets.
We have underground bunkers, we have command centers inside of mountaintops. All of this would be essentially useless against an alien attack.
One facility that has survived so far is the top-secret Raven Rock Mountain Complex in Pennsylvania. Here, a man known as America's designated survivor now runs what's left of the most powerful nation in the world.
This concept was designed back in the days of the Cold War for this very scenario of the senior leadership being taken out in one strike.
The designated survivor is someone in the line of presidential succession, generally one of the president's cabinet members. Each time the entire government gathers at events like the State of the Union address, this person is taken away to a secure location like Raven Rock.
So the hope would be that the designated survivor will carry on, will become acting president, and will be able to take those strategic decisions to maintain the continuity of government.
But now, deep within Raven Rock, a chilling reality begins to emerge. There is no way to communicate with the outside world.
You have no way to go, hey, I'm alive. The panic in this person's mind would be almost unfathomable. Your phones aren't working. This hardened shelter sure is protecting you from this massive biological outbreak or particle beams raining from the sky, but you're all alone. It's you and your security detachment and anyone else that made it in there.
The attack has been so well orchestrated that it seems the aliens knew exactly how best to strike us. But how would an alien civilization acquire such vital intelligence? The answer may simply be that we gave it to them. It's been 12 hours since a devastating alien attack force began a worldwide siege on planet Earth. Communications have been annihilated. Major military installations have been vaporized, and millions of people are already dead. It's a clear and coordinated strike against the people of Earth. But how did they find us?
Well, the fact that we are here is obvious to the aliens because we've been broadcasting our existence into outer space for the last 50 years.
Since the dawn of broadcasting in the 1920s, radio waves have left our planet at the speed of light. Today, they create a sphere approximately 110 light-years around Earth, literally trillions of miles. Any alien intelligence within that boundary could easily detect Earth and the life forms that inhabit it. Scientists have also broadcast detailed messages into space intentionally, hoping that someone out there is listening.
Are we nuts? I mean, honestly, if you are lost in a jungle and you don't know what's out there, are you going to kind of go, hello, hello, here I am, predators, come get me, you know? You won't, right? I mean, you'll be quiet because you don't know what's out there.
In 1977, NASA sent out a golden disc on the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft. It provided a visual look into who and what humanity was all about.
We sent beautiful images of the Earth. We also sent music.
Hello from the children of planet Earth.
And we also sent a lot of greetings of hello.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Hola y saludos a todos.
Konnichiwa. O genki desu ka?
In all these different languages.
And they came up with this golden disc that contained a map, and it gave you the location of the planet Earth.
If hostile aliens found that golden disc, they could easily journey into our corner of the cosmos for a closer look at planet Earth.
So if they come sufficiently close that they can, for example, start intercepting satellite communications, they could perhaps tap into the internet.
They will also be able to learn everything that they need to know about where our military is, what it's armed with, where our centers of government are located.
It's all there. We're giving away our best secrets. We are telling anyone who taps into that exactly where our vulnerabilities are.
Soccer fans in Argentina are among the hundreds of thousands around the world falling victim to a strange affliction. Carried by a black fluid that rained from the sky. This is biological war. Specially engineered to inflict maximum damage.
If they were going to engineer something that would kill us that well, it would have to be something that's based, at least in part, on what we have here on Earth. It could be engineered using their technology, but it has to affect us as residents of Earth. It has to be in some way customized for us.
Looking down at the pantry of what the aliens would have to choose from, they would think, would it be this virus or this bacteria or even the cordyceps fungi? Would that do the job for us? And they may take a look at it, see how easily it would spread, how quickly it would work, and they would say, this is the one we can use.
Cordyceps is a fungus that infects insects like ants. When the time comes to reproduce, it seizes control of the host's brain, forcing the insect to climb to a high position on a plant or tree.
Now, I know this sounds like a zombie movie, but it's true. This is what it does to ants. As it takes over the ant and begins growing inside, it makes the ant go crazy. It runs around, bumps into things, and then it climbs up on a leaf and locks its legs on the leaf, and it can't move.
There, it murders the host, and large masses emerge from the head and body. They explode, spreading spores from this high position out across the forest to infect as many new victims as possible. Aliens have transformed the cordyceps fungi, raining from the sky, into a human parasitic disease with one purpose: the annihilation of humanity. From Argentina to New York and across the world, anybody infected feels an uncontrollable urge to climb.
Our entire body would not feel like it was part of us any longer. It was fighting against us. Our minds would not be able to focus. We would see threats around us everywhere. We would begin attacking anything that got near us. And then suddenly our bodies would freeze up and they would lock in a death lock.
Then, just as it does with ants and other insects, the cordyceps fungi begins to reproduce.
Slowly, these clubs of material begin growing out of our heads, out of our chests, out of our backs. It would be grotesque. And then as we died, shells of humans would lay on the ground. And the fungi would waft through the air the spores, looking for more humans to breathe in and to start all over again.
Within hours, around the world, the air fills with deadly spores.
The worst case scenarios for a biological weapon are just devastating. They could kill almost everybody, maybe even every single person across the entire planet.
As the cordyceps fungi spreads its fatal effects on human hosts, mass panic erupts in the streets. At the 2,400-bed New York Presbyterian Hospital in Manhattan, the situation is desperate.
Talk to us. I've been here for an hour and I need someone to talk to us.
Our medical response infrastructure has limits. And those limits are taxed with things like major tornado outbreaks or hurricanes or major earthquakes. And so certainly if something on that scale is going on the worldwide, yeah, we're going to overwhelm our medical system.
If this is something that is alien-based or alien-engineered, they might not even know how to deal with it. From the doctor's side, they're becoming infected themselves. This is ugly.
As more and more of humanity succumbs to the biological attack, those who have been able to avoid exposure have only one choice if they are to survive: fight back. It's been 1 week since a vicious alien attack has rocked planet Earth. Thousands of cities have been destroyed, and millions of lives have already been lost. A deadly biological agent rained onto major cities is spreading. For those left alive, it is a battle to survive. And as a world leader once famously predicted, an alien attack would unite mankind.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Humanity, as an organized, civilized structure, would collapse in the opening week of an invasion. However, we will regroup. That's the power and spirit of humanity, that we will fight back for our common interests, because we're fighting now for the homeland.
Ironically, the same thing that could cause the greatest chaos in our history could also be the most unifying event in our history.
Major military bases and capital cities are in ruins. But around the world, surviving units are doing what they can.
Small groups of the military have endured and are trying to fight back, but it's pockets here and there. We would hit them with anything and everything that had survived. Humans would fight back with absolutely everything we could.
Kazan, Russia. As an alien ship flies into view, a ragtag group of Federation forces take aim with the advanced Pantsir S-1 surface-to-air missile system. It's the best they've got. But it's not enough. With the failure of today's most advanced weapons, some local commanders have access to what could become humanity's best chance of survival: the experimental weapons of tomorrow.
We have some dazzling weapon systems that we could offer up in defense of the planet.
Among them, something sometimes called the most powerful gun in the world.
The railgun will completely replace the old gunpowder-firing naval cannon. It will completely replace it with a magnetic system that can then launch a projectile at very, very high velocities.
The shell travels at more than 8,200 feet per second, 10 times faster than a cruise missile. But there is a clear disadvantage against this kind of foe.
One of the big problems of the railgun is that it produces an enormous amount of heat when it fires. And so this alien intelligence will quickly zoom in on the heat source and then eliminate it with whatever weapon system they have.
to defeat the aliens, there was only one other option.
Assuming that our nuclear capability has survived, we would launch an attack with that.
The United States Navy operates submarines that are capable of firing with Trident II missile, which is a nuclear weapon. And those submarines, if they're out to sea at the time of this attack, they might therefore be able to continue operating. And they might therefore be able to launch.
Lieutenant, aye, Captain. Load tubes 1 and 2. Aye, Captain. Load tubes 1 and 2. Load tube 1 and 2. Tubes 1 and 2 loaded, maintaining depth at 100 feet. Maintain. Holding. We have firing solution. Lieutenant. Aye, Captain. Fire tubes 1 and 2. Aye, Captain. Fire tubes 1 and 2.
The second that they launch, this alien intelligence will be able to determine an exact location and launch some sort of counterstrike against them. So at best, we might get off one broadside of a few nukes, and then it's all over.
If humanity was attacked by an extraterrestrial civilization, I frankly think we would have little, if any, chance against them. Any civilization with the technology to reach Earth, viable interstellar travel, when we can just about only limp out of the solar system with a couple of unmanned probes, that civilization is clearly going to be orders of magnitude above and beyond our own in terms of their science, their technology, and their weaponry.
As mankind struggles and fails to find anything to counterattack the aliens, there is another enemy lurking in the shadows. Could mankind survive an alien invasion? One month into a catastrophic and deadly attack, the human race faces mass devastation. Cities are in ruins. The military is defeated, and a grotesque biological weapon continues to spread outwards from major cities. The world's population of 7 billion is down to less than 1 million survivors, and they face a harrowing future.
We're going to have major sanitation issues dealing with all of the dead bodies, because a very large number of people will have died as a result of malnutrition.
Things like water treatment systems, if they're not back online, you're going to have real contamination problems. People are going to be drinking any water they find, whether it's contaminated or not. E. coli could be spreading, and people are dying. And there's no infrastructure left to clean things up.
With civilization in a state of chaos, a new enemy emerges. Mankind itself.
There are examples in the past of what happens when people are stranded and they need help, and help wasn't there yet. And many of them became aggressive, and it becomes a very dangerous situation unless there is a lot of social control.
The majority of society, regardless of your socioeconomic stature, will fall apart into tribal warfare. We will not be just fighting an alien invasion from the skies, but we will be fighting to survive against other humans that are looting, panicking, freaking out. Mass suicides. It's all the bad parts of the Bible, except with an alien invasion.
A very large number of people will have died as a result of violence from the tribalistic society that our world devolves into.
Why has mankind's first encounter with aliens been so devastating? If they are intelligent enough to create technology to travel between the stars, shouldn't they have evolved beyond violence and warfare.
I think that's wishful thinking. Who's to say that the smarter you get, the more moral you get? I mean, we down here, you know, we've evolved and progressed in many ways, but we still have wars, we still have poverty.
As the aliens take full control over our planet, if there is any hope for humanity, it might be to negotiate for peace.
When the situation became critical, leaders all around the world would doubtless try to negotiate with the extraterrestrials. I mean, we would say, look, you know, what do you want? Please, let's talk. If there's something you need, we'll give it to you. We would try to negotiate with them, and if that failed, we might even try an unconditional surrender. We would do anything to survive.
But is there anyone to negotiate with?
If we did somehow manage to shoot down an alien ship and went to go look at it to see what it's made of, we might find that there's nobody inside of it, that the whole thing is just a big machine, a big computer, big robot, if you will.
We've been brainwashed by Hollywood into believing that an enemy force would consist of little green men, but chances are they're going to be part robotic. Because space travel is dangerous. There's cosmic rays, there's accident, there's micrometeorites.
If what we're facing is artificial intelligence, if what we're dealing with is machines, any attempt at negotiation or surrender would be meaningless.
Sending robots to explore space is hardly the stuff of science fiction. Humans have been doing it for decades.
It's a lot easier to send a robotic craft from one planet to another than it is to send something with some biological life form in it. That's why we'd send Mars rover instead of sending people to Mars.
We've had robots that have landed on Mars and started to patrol around and inspect that planet. An alien life form, an advanced intelligence, would be doing the same thing to us.
Today, we even use robots to wage war.
There's an interesting comparison to be made with humanity. Drones, probes, are very much something we use in military attacks. Unmanned combat air vehicles are very much the future of warfare.
But why have these robotic invaders come to Earth? And is there any hope for mankind? It has been 6 months since an alien invasion has crippled humanity on planet Earth. World governments lie in ruins. Major cities smolder from the attack. And those who have managed to survive struggle with a sparse food supply, a diminishing number of freshwater sources, and an entire digital communication system that has been destroyed.
Even if extraterrestrials launch a devastating attack on planet Earth, some of us will endure. We will go on, but it will be in a very small numbers and in a totally different way.
People who are lucky enough to still be alive are the young and the strong, the ones who have managed to find a community, a pocket that they can live in, that has some supplies.
Hunting and other primal instincts will be the keys to sustaining life. All the while, like the spacecraft hovering in the sky, one question will loom. Why would alien robots have traveled across the universe to wipe out life on planet Earth?
Earth has minerals and all sorts of resources that can be harvested by an energy-hungry civilization. So there's always a chance they'll land on the Earth and plunder us. But there are going to be a lot of other habitable planets that are rich in natural resources that have no life on them. And I think those are the planets they would plunder first.
What is likely is that they've exhausted their own resources and polluted their own planet beyond the point of return, and they have to come here to make this the place that they're going to set up shop and continue to live. Not just to set up mining colonies to pull iron ore out of the ground and tungsten out of the ground. They're coming here to live here.
For the aliens, with the attack complete, the next phase is terraforming, the process of converting a planet to an environment better suited for your particular form of life.
I can well imagine the next phase might be machines, huge machines that drop down from the sky, hit the Earth, anchor themselves into the Earth, and begin chugging out new gases, changing the temperature of our world, changing our atmosphere to a different composition.
Earth is a prime candidate because it sits in what is called the habitable zone, an area around a star where water can exist in liquid form and life can thrive. Scientists believe that it's this prime location that provides perhaps the most viable motive for an alien invasion.
This is no different from what humans are beginning to do. We're sending out robotic space probes, for example, to Mars. They scoop up some soil. So there's nothing new about this. Any extraterrestrials coming here to attack, then to terraform, would really be only doing a slightly more advanced version of what we are ourselves doing.
What? For any survivors on Earth, terraforming would be humanity's final demise.
They come here and then they terraform the planet and turn it into the air that they can breathe, which then kills us off.
We would not be able to breathe. Our plants, our animals would wither and die, given the fact that the atmosphere itself is being changed, in which case we would be driven to extinction.
This is not just an idea torn from the pages of science fiction. As humanity stretches farther into space, scientists are already pondering what might happen if primitive alien life stands in the way of our own survival.
I have no doubt that if we have to go to another planet and there is some sort of species there that is in our way, I think we'll destroy it so that we can go on. It's the law of survival.
Truthfully, it just may be business. They are expanding. Their outlook on the universe is very different than ours. And the Earth just happens to be on a part of the Orion Arm in the Milky Way galaxy they're passing through right now, and they're going to use it for their needs without a second thought of what lives on it or whether it's precious or should be saved or not. It's just business.
The human race is under attack, from the most devastating weather disaster to ever strike the modern world.
The magnitude of something like this is a game changer for the entire planet.
Blizzards, hurricanes, Wildfires, massive floods. Hellish destruction that can only be caused by one phenomenon: the shutdown of the world's ocean currents.
You screw with an ocean weather system, the climate goes out of control.
It is the end of the world as we know it.
Will you be ready? When Doomsday strikes, can any of us survive? Ocean currents control our climate by transferring heat and moisture from the water into our atmosphere, thereby influencing temperatures around the world. 12,000 years ago, as the last ice age was ending, the global ocean currents shut down, and much of the world slipped back into a deep freeze that lasted for over 1,000 years. If the ocean currents shut down today, what would happen to our planet? Could we survive?
This isn't some far-flung fictional thing. This is the beginning of a global climactic shift that is almost too much to survive. It'll be a very slow, painful, horrible death.
It's not a question of if it will happen, it's almost certainly a question of when.
Boston's Fenway Park. Red Sox fans are enjoying the game when suddenly the oldest ballpark in the U.S. is hit with a deluge of water.
This is beyond bad weather. Boston will be wiped off the map. The entire eastern seaboard is going to drown.
The destruction in Boston is the result of a catastrophe scarier than anything mankind has ever faced. One that begins decades earlier. In 2015, scientists discovered that something disastrous is happening to the system of ocean currents known as the global ocean conveyor belt.
The global ocean conveyor belt is the circulation system of the Earth's oceans.
The main driver of the global ocean conveyor belt happens in the North Atlantic. Like a giant factory conveyor belt, warm water moves from the tropical equator to the northern Atlantic Ocean, where it turns cold, salty, and dense. This denser water then sinks and flows south along the seafloor, enabling the warmer water to continually flow above it from the tropics. The cold water travels through all the world's oceans until it mixes with warmer water and returns to the North Atlantic to repeat the cycle.
Like the blood vessels in your body that transport nutrients all throughout your system, large currents transport energy and heat all throughout the ocean.
The ocean currents are vitally important because they distribute heat that affects the climate around the world.
700 light bulbs per person per year could be continuously lit by just that amount of heat transported by the ocean.
But now, an international scientific expedition makes a startling discovery in the North Atlantic. Because of global warming, melting ice in Greenland has flooded the surface of the ocean with fresh water, diluting its saltiness so it doesn't sink anymore. Without the motion of this sinking water, the conveyor belt has stopped completely.
The oceans drive weather systems. You screw with an ocean weather system, the climate goes out of control, and then it kills you.
And this unleashes a chain of disasters, a domino effect. Some will strike quickly, others will take years, even decades to unfold.
You would think you're just flooding the North Atlantic with a little fresh water, no big deal. But a very delicate web that's been woven, and breaking one strand could have a catastrophic effect across the globe.
At first, nobody notices the effects of the ocean current shutdown. Life goes on as normal. But 6 months later, the disaster surfaces. People in Northern Europe are the first to suffer the wrath. They typically live in a mild climate year-round, thanks to the heat released from warm surface currents in the Atlantic. But without this hot air, a cold Arctic blast assaults the region.
You'll have much colder wind dropping down from northern latitudes, and the climate will begin shifting dramatically, especially in Europe.
Without warm water continuously flowing into northern Europe, temperatures will begin to drop.
The effects of the deep freeze quickly ripple around the world. A cargo ship from New York is headed for Hamburg, Germany, the second largest port in Europe. But the harbor is iced in. The head of the Port Authority orders icebreakers to free up the ships. This is the worst winter he and people across the Northern Hemisphere have ever experienced. Intense blizzards bring hurricane-force winds and mountains of snow.
The snowstorms would be dropping feet of snow an hour. And the general temperatures being around 27 degrees Fahrenheit, that will freeze very fast and very hard.
A tourist heading for Paris is caught off guard by sudden whiteout conditions. Emergency services can't get through the snow to help him or dozens of other trapped victims. Now the cold becomes a killer.
Hypothermia is terrifying. It's when your core temperature gets too low for your body to sustain itself. Your muscles start to cramp. You start to get labored breathing. You will actually run a fever as your body is trying to keep your body alive. And then your core temperature will crash. Your body is shutting down because it's too cold. And you will literally freeze to death.
Northern Europe is doomed to remain in a deep freeze. And the death toll will continue to rise. Meanwhile, the climate disaster spreads across the Atlantic to the U.S. In Massachusetts Bay, freezing air rushing down from the North Atlantic stirs up a major storm front. A family of lobstermen is headed out to sea when they get the alert. 100 miles wide, 85-mile-an-hour winds. It's a nor'easter unlike anything the lobstermen have ever experienced. Normally, they hit between autumn and early spring. But this nor'easter comes in the middle of summer.
We would be having increased frequency and intensity of nor'easters affecting us here in Boston. And those would be occurring with much greater strength.
The superstorm sweeps through Boston, inundating the city with 15 feet of icy seawater. It swamps the subways and turns streets into rivers. Thousands escape the flooding by moving to higher ground. But some people in Boston are all but helpless as they're dragged to their deaths.
It's a huge, terrifying catastrophe. You have the complete collapse of a society on both a local and global scale.
From Boston to Northern Europe, as images of the catastrophe spread, people around the world brace themselves for the worst by fortifying shelters and stockpiling food, water, and other essential supplies. But will it be enough? Can anyone on Earth survive the deadliest disaster in human history? Global ocean currents, which regulate heat and rainfall around the world, have shut down, unleashing violent changes in the weather on both sides of the Atlantic. Frigid temperatures paralyze much of the northeastern U.S. In Boston, freak storms flood the city, leaving tens of thousands homeless and many more dead. Meanwhile, in Europe, the area first affected by the ocean current shutdown, death by hypothermia is becoming a daily event. As the crisis deepens, what will happen to humanity? Can we survive? A year into this catastrophic new weather pattern, the people of New York City now face the wrath. Off the coast, a massive cyclone, twice the size and strength of 2012's Hurricane Sandy, roars inland. Monster winds and waves slam into the Statue of Liberty and then barrel toward shore.
A storm twice as powerful as Sandy is not even conceivable. Dams of cars will be created in neighborhoods. Subways will be flooded. This is destruction on a massive scale.
30-foot waves and 100-mile-per-hour winds explode through windows and doors, tearing buildings apart at the seams and dragging people deeper underwater.
You have rain, wind, chaos, panic, and disorder all assaulting a city at once. It would be panic in the streets.
Some people will be able to survive, but unless you have the resources and you have the wherewithal, you won't. The best thing to do would be to get out.
And while the northeastern U.S. is battered by superstorms, the apocalyptic effects of this disaster are having a reverse effect in other parts of the world. With warm water no longer flowing north across the equator due to the shutdown of the ocean currents, heat builds up in the southern oceans. Because of this, The band of highest temperatures that once circled the equator shifts further south, along with the rain belts that normally drench the tropical regions of the world.
The rain belts would probably shift southward, putting areas that now get a lot of rain into drought.
The subtropical region of Punjab was once India's breadbasket, an area with rich soil and an ideal climate for growing many types of grains to feed the country's 1.3 billion people. Now, the lack of rainfall has become a crisis for over 1/7 of the world's population.
You have huge breadbasket regions, say in India, that require flooding for rice, that require large amounts of moisture for huge amounts of crops.
That moisture used to come from seasonal monsoons, but not anymore. The farmers fear they won't be able to harvest enough grain to feed their families.
The monsoon system over Asia is changing because of the cooling from the circulation shutdown, extending downwind over the Asian continent. That could lead to not just a slowing of the monsoon, but a complete collapse. And if that persisted year after year, the drought could be devastating.
Now that could easily topple the bread baskets of the world.
The world's areas of drought spread, and crops keep failing. From Southeast Asia to the southern regions of the United States. In the Texas Panhandle, farmers helplessly watch their way of life die off as the lack of rainfall turns cornfields into deserts. And strong winds kick up the parched soil, producing violent dust storms.
This kind of drought will make the Great Depression Dust Bowl look paltry. This is orders of magnitude larger. This is all the corn from the Texas Panhandle evaporating. Farmers won't be able to cope with this. The green belt of Texas will just be hot, desolate, and disturbing.
And while the northeastern U.S. is battered by superstorms, the apocalyptic effects of this disaster start traveling south. The next target is Brazil. Locals are enjoying the beaches of Copacabana and Ipanema, when suddenly the weather turns violent.
The shutdown of the circulation is effectively shifting the trade winds downward. You've compressed them in a smaller amount of space, so the actual winds themselves could increase.
Monsoons and 75-mile-per-hour winds rage ashore. As the storm surges through the city of Rio de Janeiro, it becomes a death trap for locals and tourists who are violently pulled under the swift-moving water. And as people flee for higher ground, they face another killer. Stormwater rapidly collects on the steep slope of the Serrana Mountains. The water-soaked ground loosens, creating an 80-foot swell of mud, rocks, and water. The landslide flattens the shanty slums that cling to the mountainside. Thousands of people are buried alive. As the climate catastrophe ripples around the world, it finally reaches the Pacific Ocean, where the shallow coastal water is now unusually hot due to the shutdown of the ocean currents.
Whenever we have warmer water, we tend to have stronger hurricanes or typhoons that form there because they really get their energy from the warm surface water. And if that is warming up, there's going to be more energy to power those big storms.
In Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, a group of American tourists run for their lives as a Category 5 hurricane slams ashore. With 60-foot waves and 165-mile-per-hour winds. The vacationers' desperate cries for help are barely heard over the turbulent stormwater that pulls them out to sea.
Puerto Vallarta will be ripped apart by a constant barrage of supercyclones. These are massive storms that will just walk right over the peninsula and wipe out cities. They will be gone. It's not just a cyclone hit, we can rebuild. It's, oh, a cyclone hit, and here comes another one. And there's one after that.
Puerto Vallarta is merely the latest victim. As towns, villages, and cities from Central to South America get buried underwater. As the effects of the ocean current shutdown spread around the world, no place is immune from this disaster, which has already killed over tens of thousands of people. But these catastrophes are just the beginning. There's a new threat to our survival emerging at the bottom of the world. The ocean conveyor belt of currents that help regulate temperatures around the globe has come to a grinding halt, with consequences that are threatening our very existence. A decade into the disaster, the shutdown of the ocean currents has set off a series of extreme weather disasters across the world. From superstorms and severe drought to massive hurricanes and blizzards. Nearly 500 million people have already died. As the death toll climbs, temperatures continue to plunge in the cold regions of North America and Northern Europe. With warm ocean currents no longer flowing up to the North Atlantic, the surface water remains cold, creating frigid temperatures across Northern Europe, with winters that last for 10 months. Snow falls relentlessly in Germany. The head of the country's busiest seaport once used giant icebreakers to get ships into port. But it's no longer possible to keep up with the deep freeze, and the vital transportation hub shuts down. Delivery of food and other resources grinds to a halt. For people who once took their next meal for granted, like the former head of the Port Authority, finding food for his family becomes a full-time occupation. People suffering from cold weather afflictions like pneumonia and frostbite begin to overrun hospitals.
Frostbite is the physical freezing of your tissue to the point where it can no longer sustain itself, and then it rots. And then it gets to a point where the skin begins to turn black, and the only thing you can do to save it from spreading is to cut your fingers off. Or you can wait and they'll fall off themselves.
While Hamburg and other cities in Northern Europe freeze, in the southern United States, it's a completely different scene, a deadly heat wave. Over time, the stalled ocean currents have warmed the atmosphere and driven away the rain belt, creating a severe drought. Smoke now fills the skies above the Texas Panhandle as the surrounding dried-up cornfields become a vast tinderbox for wildfires.
The decrease in atmospheric moisture creates much drier conditions at the surface, and you could have large-scale fires, and that introduces a lot of soot and a lot of material into the atmosphere. And it can be hazardous to human health.
People try to evacuate to safer areas, but thousands become trapped as flames and smoke engulf homes.
This isn't something a large military-grade fire department would be able to handle. Communities will be cut off and surrounded by flame. This isn't easily escapable. You've got fire raging across states, across state borders. You have tornadoes of fire forming. This is bad.
While parts of the U.S. become a hellish inferno, over 5,500 miles to the south, in Rio de Janeiro, the climate disaster brings other dangers. Years of relentless monsoons trigger outbreaks of typhoid and Zika virus. In 2016, the mosquito-carried Zika virus was just an emerging problem. Now, stagnant floodwater provides a massive breeding ground for the insects and the disease.
People would give each other a wide berth on the streets. There'd be elaborate measures to try and create a bulwark against microbes. I don't think that the cities in their present form could survive an event like this.
In 10 years, nearly 1/10 of the world's population has perished. And the survivors cling to life as the planet continues to be rocked by widespread catastrophes. And now, the research scientists who first confirmed the shutdown of the ocean currents in the North Atlantic have a new cause for alarm. They take their research vessel to the South Pole. The bottom of the planet is heating up.
When the conveyor belt shuts down, the heat has to go somewhere that was going to the North Atlantic. It's going to the south.
An enormous set of glaciers is rapidly melting. They're part of the West Antarctic ice sheet, a mass of ice 2 miles thick and as big as the entire state of Texas.
When the warm water comes underneath these glaciers and starts to melt away at these pinning points, it's going to raise global oceans.
Despite being nearly 8,000 miles away, Miami is among the first cities to feel the impact of the rising seas. Most of the metropolitan area is only 6 feet above sea level. On the streets, people are forced to walk knee-deep in polluted salt water and then return to their homes that have been flooded. New Orleans, New York, and Boston are in equally dire straits. With so many places becoming uninhabitable, is there anywhere left on Earth to escape this disaster? Ocean currents control the climate around the world by regulating heat and rainfall. If they ever stop moving, scientists predict decades of cataclysmic weather events that will threaten our very existence. Could you survive? "15 years after the shutdown of the global ocean currents, nearly 500 million people are dead. Whole ways of life are now impossible. In Boston, A family of lobstermen who had worked these waters for centuries now find the seas off Massachusetts lacking the fish they once used as bait to catch lobster. For survivors everywhere, it's a constant battle against storms, starvation, and disease. And there's no end in sight.
This is a change that is not going to stop after weeks or months or years. This is something that is decades to centuries worth of changes.
This is a global climactic shift that is almost too much to survive.
In the American Southwest, a severe drought has ravaged the area. Fire departments can no longer contain the wildfires that continue to burn through cities and states. Another victim is the Colorado River. It once was the lifeblood of the region, supplying hydroelectric power and providing water for millions of people. Now, it's running dry.
If there's no snowpack and no rainfall, the Colorado River starts to dry up. The Colorado River also has a hydroelectric dam. The human condition is dependent on things like electricity and water. You take one of those away and things fall apart.
Without water, crops and cattle have long since died off, and people are struggling to hang on.
With a lower percentage of Earth's land area receiving ample amounts of rain, you have starvation on the very short horizon.
The United States isn't the only country reeling from the effects of this endless drought. On the other side of the world, without the annual monsoon rains, India's groundwater reserves drain to zero. A human will die after 3 days without water. So it's a resource worth fighting for.
The significant changes in climate are going to inevitably lead to wars and battles as people are struggling to possess more precious resources or expand their territory in order to feed their populations.
When food is scarce, societies tend to come apart. People can't get food, they rebel quite often.
While an endless drought is driving the population of India to the brink of starvation. 3,500 miles away, the people of Northern Europe are losing their battle with the endless cold.
You have concrete, you have roads, you have buildings, pipes, all of these things that will just slowly corrode. The weight of snow over so long can destroy even the most robust building.
The former head of Hamburg's Port Authority and his family are just a few of the millions migrating to southern Spain and Greece in search of warmer temperatures. As people seek refuge, there's also a mass exodus in Brazil, India, and the northeastern United States. The out-of-work lobstermen are among the millions fleeing to places like Florida.
Once we start to have mass migrations, this means that governments will begin to collapse. We could have total chaos like we already see in certain parts of the world.
You can't just take an entire population of a country and drop them somewhere and go, nope, we're going to be fine. The planet will slowly squeeze us into pockets of instability and then kill us.
Will the climate refugees survive? Or are they leaving behind one disaster only to face another? The shutdown of the global ocean conveyor belt has stopped the ocean currents from flowing, causing an extreme cooling of the North Atlantic and a warming effect in the world's southern oceans, setting in motion a cascade of disasters across the world. Is there any safe place left on Earth? Across the globe, hundreds of millions of people flee their homes in search of food, water, and a livable climate. It's a mass migration of climate refugees that's unparalleled in history.
We're talking entire nations or entire continents that might be forced to migrate from one location to another. How do we handle such a significant change in where people live? How do we feed them? How do we shelter them?
The crisis cuts across boundaries of class and wealth. A man who once ran one of the largest ports in Europe dies as a ragged refugee thousands of miles from his home. Over 6,000 miles to the southeast, in Rio de Janeiro, the seaside villas of the rich have been washed away, and the hillside shacks of the poor are buried in mud after decades of monsoons. Now both rich and poor fight for precious space inland.
A densely populated city such as Rio would be catastrophic if the sea levels rise that much. All of these people would then have to be displaced, collapsed, and condensed in an even more populous area as refugees.
Humanity most likely is going to try to move around and find these pockets where we like this temperature range, we like this amount of rainfall. Now, politically, that's gonna be trouble because they may start putting up borders and walls and keeping people out.
As the death toll mounts worldwide, another disaster is brewing in the South Pole. A buildup of heat in the Southern Ocean has been eating away at the glaciers that are part of the West Antarctic ice sheet. As they rapidly melt, sea levels rise, and now every coastal city in the world is under threat.
Year after year after year, the water's getting closer to my front door until finally the water is inside your home.
In the U.S., a storm surge is approaching Miami. It's high tide and a full moon. Exactly the same conditions as when Superstorm Sandy struck the eastern seaboard in 2012. But now, even regular tides are over 4 feet higher because of the rise in sea levels. It's the worst night in Miami's history. On the streets, people are overtaken by the churning seawater. Some find temporary refuge. But with the entire city in crisis, emergency crews can't reach them all. Many who escape drowning will die of hunger and lack of drinking water. Others will never be found.
Any kind of coastal city will have a massive problem if there's sea level rise. If you don't have the infrastructure in place to begin combating that, it will just keep coming. Smart people would move out of those cities. You have to adapt or die.
From Miami to Rio and London, as sea levels continue to rise across the world, humanity will be put to the ultimate test. The next wave of destruction could mark the end of modern civilization. It's the year 2101. Global ocean currents, which help regulate temperatures around the world, have long since shut down, unleashing over 8 decades of violent and cataclysmic weather events that have changed the course of history. Is there any chance of survival for the future generations? Can we adapt? Or is mankind's fate sealed? In almost every corner of the world, humanity is barely hanging on through the worst climate crisis since the dawn of civilization. Famine and natural disasters have killed nearly 2 billion people. Mass migrations are igniting civil wars.
It is the end of the world as we know it.
And the global catastrophe continues to unfold in West Antarctica, where massive glaciers are rapidly melting into the ocean. Sea levels are now over 7 feet higher than normal, and they continue to rise.
Every coastal city on the planet will be experiencing sea level rises of this magnitude.
The coastlines of the world have to be rewritten and redrawn.
Amsterdam would be gone. Venice would be gone. These cities would not exist anymore, other than in postcards and if you liked scuba diving.
Miami, Florida, which has already been beaten and battered by titanic superstorms, now vanishes into the Atlantic Ocean, along with most of the southeastern part of the state. Most of the older climate refugees, some of whom came from as far as Boston in search of warmer weather decades ago, have died. Now their children are forced to retreat inland.
This is a huge problem that would be pretty difficult to overcome. Where do you put states worth of people into another one?
The younger generation of the lobstermen, whose families migrated from Boston to Florida, is still alive. And now they cast lobster cages into the Gulf of Mexico. The entire northeastern seaboard of the U.S. is forever changed. New York is now the Venice of the 22nd century. Lower Manhattan has been transformed into canals where water taxis transport the rich to walled-off buildings with entrances safely above the rising tides.
Sea level rise will completely encompass the city of Manhattan. You can then build sky bridges from one part of the town to the other. You won't be able to get around unless you're in a boat.
Over 200 miles to the north, in Boston, baseball games become a symbol of defiance. Proof that life goes on in spite of climate change. So the bleachers at Fenway Park are still packed. But the famous ballpark, once over a half-mile from the water's edge, is now a riverfront stadium due to sea level rise. In the harbor, Boston tries to defend itself against the swelling waters of the Atlantic with levees and seawalls. But the city engineers have underestimated just how high sea levels will continue to rise.
The ocean is not going to put up with a seawall that is trying to keep it out. It is going to find another low-lying area in which to flood.
And so, when the most powerful nor'easter in decades strikes Boston, the waves breach the city's barriers. Millions of gallons of water rush through Boston's shoreline of bays, inlets, and rivers.
A big storm comes along, breaches the seawall. You've now turned a city into effectively a big bowl. The same wall that was there to protect is now going to keep the water inside.
Fenway Park cannot hold back the surging seawater as the never-ending cycle of apocalyptic weather strikes again. The future of humanity remains uncertain, and the effects of the climate disaster are far from over.
You have the prescription for kind of a dark age. A more violent society is those survivors tried to scramble and hold on to what they've got.
This frightening view of the future, with our ocean currents coming to a complete standstill, is based on science from the present. Scientists have been warning that the global ocean conveyor belt may be slowing down. For well over a century, the Earth has been steadily warming. Experts claim 2016 was the hottest year on record for the entire planet. But at the same time, there were also record cold temperatures in the North Atlantic. This suggests that as global warming continues to melt Arctic ice into the sea, this fresh water is making the cold surface currents less salty and dense, so that they can't sink. Without this natural process, the world's ocean currents could eventually shut down.
We're seeing that right now. That is ongoing. Look at the Greenland ice sheet. It's not only melting more, but it's melting faster. So this is a concern because that then would provide the large amounts of fresh water to the North Atlantic Ocean to cause a shutdown.
To halt or slow down the global ocean conveyor belt. The magnitude of something like this occurring is a game changer for the entire planet. It's so much energy, so massive of a change. Humans will have to adapt to survive. They will not be able to change to make things back to the way they were.
This isn't some far-flung fictional thing. A climate catastrophe is what we are facing right now. And unless we do something soon to prolong our way of life, we have to begin to evolve or die.
With sea level rise, it's not a question of if it will happen, it's almost certainly a question of when.